Okay, negative numbers can be pretty tricky to work with and can cause a lot of issues, so I wanted to make a video on a few examples on adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing with negative numbers. So for instance, let's say we end up in this situation, like 4 plus negative 3. I'm going to put it in parentheses like that. So we're adding a negative number to a positive number. Well, this can be reduced to just simple subtraction. This is the same thing as saying 4 minus 3, which is a positive 1. So most likely you would see it already kind of reduced like this, but oftentimes we can end up in a situation like this if we're, say, plugging in a number to an equation, like replacing a variable with a negative number. We might end up with something like this, plus a negative. So plus a negative reduces down to just a simple subtraction. Okay, so let's say we want to subtract a negative number. So 4 minus negative 3. This is kind of like a double negative. If you see a double subtraction like this, minus negative, I was taught to make this a plus positive. We can reduce this to just 4 plus 3. So if you see this double negative, minus negative, almost like multiplying two negatives together, it will cancel into a positive number. So this will give us a nice positive 7. So let's flip things around a little bit. So that's another example. Let's say if we had something like negative 3 plus 4. So we have a negative number plus a positive number. With addition, we can actually flip the order of this and just see this as 4 minus 3. Negative 3 plus 4, we can treat it as 4 minus 3. Addition has this nice property that we can change the order. Subtraction does not have that property. It's called being commutative. We can switch the order. So this was actually similar to our first one here. You notice if we flip the order, we can see the same question, 4 plus negative 3. So we end up with the same result, positive 1. But let's say this isn't necessarily working with a negative number, but the result is a negative number, 3 minus 4. 3 minus 4, this result would be negative 1. We're subtracting a number that's larger than the number that we're subtracting from. Or we can imagine we have like $3 and then we spend $4. We'll be $1 in debt. It's often expressed as a number line. If we imagine positive 3, here's 0. And if we want to subtract 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd move 4 places to the left, end up a little bit beyond 0 over there at negative 1. So subtracting a larger number from a smaller number gives us a negative result. So just want to throw that in there. A little bit different from what we're working with, but involves a negative. Okay, so what about if we have two negative numbers? Put this over here. How about negative 3 minus 4? So we're subtracting from a negative. One thing we can do, so this is one perspective, we can view this as like negative 3 plus 4, plus negative 4. So we're kind of like reversing what we did here. We can express this subtraction as plus a negative, and then from this perspective, it can make some sense that we'll end up adding these numbers together and the result will stay negative. So negative 3 plus negative 4 will give us a negative 7. So we're subtracting from a negative. The result stays negative and it becomes more negative. We can, using the money analogy, like if I'm $3 in debt, I'm at negative 3 in my bank account. And then I spend $4 more, I'm going to be $7 in debt. It's tempting to try to do some kind of subtraction since we see the minus here, but really we can view it as an addition of two negative numbers. We can also use the number line visual too, which can help. If we're over here, let's just call this negative 3, and I'm subtracting 4. If I'm subtracting, I'm going to move to the left on the number line, 1, 2, 3, 4 places. So negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7. So sometimes the visual approach can be helpful to see it. So, but whichever metaphor sticks, you can go with that. So the result is more negative. Let's do kind of a combination. Let's say we had negative 3 minus negative 4. So we have a negative number and we're subtracting a negative number, subtracting a negative. So let's combine maybe a few of these rules. We have this double subtraction minus a negative. That's like what we did here, minus a negative, that will cancel and become positive. Work down here. So like -3 plus 4 or plus +4. Kind of trained to do that. Okay, -3 plus 4. I'm combining two numbers. One is negative, one is positive. Starting with the negative number, I can do that like flipping around like what we did here. This is actually the same problem. You can view this as 4 minus 3, which is +1. The result will stay positive. 4 is a larger number than 3, so we're still in the positive range. If this was like -8 plus 4, let's just look at that as an example too. We can still flip this around if we want to view it as a subtraction, 4 minus 8. But notice the result will be negative. We'll end up with a -4. So kind of a similar situation with these last two, and it depends on which number is initially larger. The negative number is larger here, so the result will stay negative. $8 in debt, and we put $4 in, we're still $4 in debt, so a little bit less negative. So it's addition and subtraction. Multiplication and division, which might be a little more familiar with. Let's just go through a few examples. So let's start with multiplication. So we're multiplying two numbers together. If they're both positive, probably most used to this, the result will stay positive. Like +1 times +1, the result is +1. If one of these is negative, so we can have two different situations. The first number could be -1 times +1, or the second number could be negative, +1 times -1. Either way, the result will be negative. These are both going to be equal to -1. So if only one of them is negative, if you have one negative, one positive, the result is negative. The third case would be if they're both negative, -1 times -1. Similar to with subtracting a negative, this double negative cancels and becomes a +1, +1. So if they're both negative in multiplication, we get a positive. If they're both positive, we keep the positive. And if one of them is negative and one is positive, the result is a negative. So this can be little things like this. It's easy to forget or to lose a negative, so it can cause some errors in your mathematics as the problems get larger and larger. So it can feel simple, but it's easy to make a small mistake with these. So multiplication, the rules for division are actually exactly the same, but let's just go through those two. So positive over a positive, like +1 over +1, the result will be positive. So that's the same thing as this one. If they're both negative, a negative over a negative, -1 over a -1. And I'm doing my division representing it like a fraction, but we could use the division sign too. So if they're both negative, they will cancel to become positive, +1. And then similarly to here, if only one is negative and one is positive, the result will be negative. So that can look like either 1 divided by -1 or -1 divided by 1. Either way, the result will be a -1. Okay, so just be careful working with negatives. It takes maybe a little while to get used to the rules, and then eventually it can become more second nature.